I'm Brooke, 27 years old now, but this story begins in our middle-class neighborhood in Ohio where my childhood fell apart. My stepfather Harrison had a belt, and his son had entitlement issues. When I was 16, refusing to be Tyler's servant earned me welts that took weeks to heal. That night, I made a decision that changed everything. I left with just $1 in my pocket. What they didn't know was that their abuse didn't break me. It became the foundation for everything I built. Before I dive into how I went from abuse victim to survivor, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe if you want more stories about overcoming adversity and finding strength in your darkest moments. My early childhood memories are tinged with warmth and safety. My biological father, Garrett, was a kind man who coached my soccer team and read me bedtime stories every night without fail. I remember how he'd lift me onto his shoulders at the park, his laughter mixing with mine as we chased squirrels. He worked as an electrical engineer, and I still have the little circuit boards we built together for my science projects. He called me his little spark, a nickname that made me feel special and loved. But my world shattered when I was 7. Dad had a heart attack at work. One minute he was fine, the next he was gone. I remember my mom Stephanie's face when she picked me up from school that day, hollow, like someone had scooped out everything that made her who she was. For months, our house felt like it was underwater. Movements were slow, sounds muffled. Mom cried at night when she thought I was sleeping. I'd find her looking at photos, touching Dad's clothes that still hung in the closet. We were drifting, just the two of us, trying to figure out how to be a family of two. Then Harrison entered our lives. He was my mom's co-worker at the insurance company, and at first, he was just the man who brought us casseroles and offered to mow our lawn. He had a son named Tyler, who was 13 when I was 10. Harrison seemed nice enough, telling jokes that made Mom laugh for the first time in months. I was grateful for that, even if his smile never quite reached his eyes when he looked at me. They married just 8 months after Dad died. The wedding was small, nothing like the photos I'd seen of my parents' wedding with its flowing white dress and garden full of flowers. Mom wore a beige suit, and Harrison kept checking his watch during the ceremony. Tyler stood beside his father, looking bored and rolling his eyes whenever the pastor spoke about love and commitment. "You'll have a brother now," Mom told me the night before the wedding, her voice bright with forced enthusiasm. "Won't that be nice?" But Tyler was never interested in being my brother. From the beginning, he made it clear I was an inconvenience, an obstacle between him and his father's attention. He was tall for his age, with the same square jaw as Harrison and a permanent smirk that made me uneasy. At first, Harrison tried to win me over. He brought me dolls and candy, asked about school with exaggerated interest. I was polite because it made Mom happy, but something about his attention felt wrong, like he was studying me rather than getting to know me. "Such a serious little girl," he'd say, tapping my nose. "You should smile more, Brooke. Pretty girls should smile." Within 6 months of the wedding, we moved from our cozy 3-bedroom home to a sprawling house in Oakwood Heights, a neighborhood where the lawns were perfectly manicured and the cars in the driveways cost more than my entire college fund. Harrison said it was for better schools, but I missed our old neighbors and the treehouse Dad had built in the backyard. The new house had 5 bedrooms, a swimming pool, and a game room that quickly became Tyler's domain. My room was the smallest, tucked at the end of the hall beside the laundry room. The washing machine cycle became my nightly lullaby. "Isn't this amazing?" Mom asked, spinning in the marble-floored entryway on moving day. "Harrison is so generous. We never could have afforded this on our own." That was the first sign of the financial control Harrison would exert. Our old house had been paid off with Dad's life insurance, but Harrison insisted on selling it and putting the money into accounts only he could access. Mom's part-time job at the insurance office became full-time, then included weekends, but somehow all her earnings went into family expenses that Harrison managed. The change in my mother was gradual but unmistakable. The woman who once stood up to my second-grade teacher when I was unfairly accused of cheating began to defer to Harrison on everything from dinner choices to my school activities. She stopped wearing the bright colors she loved, switching to the muted tones Harrison preferred. Her laugh, once full and uninhibited, became softer, more cautious. "Harrison knows best," became her mantra. "He's just looking out for us." Meanwhile, the favoritism toward Tyler grew from subtle to blatant. While I wore sensible clothes from department store sales, Tyler got designer labels. My request for piano lessons was deemed too expensive, but the same month, Tyler received a new gaming system and a dirt bike. At restaurants, Harrison would order for Tyler without asking what he wanted, then scrutinize my choice and often change it to something less expensive. "You don't need the steak, Brooke. The chicken is healthier anyway," he'd say, while Tyler ordered whatever he wanted. By the time I was 12, Tyler had learned exactly how to manipulate his father. A simple "Brooke was mean to me" could result in my privileges being revoked, even without evidence. Harrison never questioned Tyler's claims, and my defenses fell on deaf ears. My mother, once my fierce protector, became a silent witness. She'd give me sympathetic looks when Harrison wasn't watching, sometimes sneaking me small treats or privileges he denied. But she never openly contradicted him, never stood firm against his unfair treatment. "Just try to get along," she'd whisper. "Harrison has given us so much." But what he'd given came with invisible strings, and with each passing month, those strings tightened around our lives like a net. I felt like a visitor in my own home, an unwelcome guest who had overstayed her welcome but had nowhere else to go. The framed photos of my dad that once dotted our old house were reduced to a single small picture in my bedroom. When I asked about the others, Mom said they were in storage, but her eyes couldn't meet mine when she said it. Later, I found them in the trash, Harrison having decided they were holding us back from moving forward as a family. That night, I rescued the photos and hid them under my mattress, a secret connection to the life and love I'd lost. Sometimes, when the house was quiet, I'd take them out and tell my dad about my day, imagining what advice he'd give, how he'd make things right if he were still here. But he wasn't here. And slowly, I was learning that in Harrison's house, I wasn't just losing my dad's memory, I was losing my mother too. By the time I turned 13, Harrison had established a rigid set of rules that governed our household, or more accurately, governed me. Tyler seemed exempt from most of them, creating a stark contrast in our daily lives that became impossible to ignore. My weekdays followed a strict schedule. Wake up at 6 a.m. to help prepare breakfast, which meant making breakfast for everyone, attend school, return home immediately to start chores, complete homework, help with dinner, clean up, and be in my room by 9 p.m. Weekends weren't for relaxation. They were for deep cleaning the house, doing laundry, and yard work. Tyler, meanwhile, slept until noon on weekends. His chores consisted of occasionally taking out the trash, a task he frequently forgot, without consequences. While I scrubbed bathrooms, he played video games. When I asked about the imbalance, Harrison's response was always the same. "Tyler has sports and needs to focus on his future. You need to learn responsibility." The first time Harrison put his hands on me in anger, I was 12. I'd accidentally broken a crystal paperweight on his desk while dusting. His fingers dug into my upper arm as he marched me to the corner of his office, leaving fingerprint bruises that lasted for days. "Clumsy girl," he hissed. "Do you know how much that cost?" When Mom saw the bruises later, I told her what happened. She frowned, touched the marks gently, but then sighed. "He's under a lot of stress at work, sweetie. Try to be more careful around his things." That night, I heard them arguing about it, the only time Mom ever really confronted him about his treatment of me. "She's just a child, Harrison. You can't grab her like that. Don't tell me how to discipline a child," he shot back. "Your permissive parenting is why she's so careless in the first place." The next morning, Mom made my favorite blueberry pancakes, but didn't mention the argument. When I tried to talk to her about Harrison, she quickly changed the subject, her eyes darting nervously to the doorway as if expecting him to appear. These moments of attempted connection with my mother became increasingly rare. Harrison seemed to have a sixth sense for when we were having a private conversation, appearing suddenly to interrupt with some task that needed immediate attention. "Stephanie, I need you to look at these insurance papers," or "Brooke, didn't I tell you to clean the pool filter?" By 14, the belt had entered our household vocabulary. It hung in Harrison's study, a brown leather strap with a silver buckle that gleamed under the overhead lights. He never actually used it at first, he didn't need to. The threat was enough. "Don't make me get the belt, Brooke," he would say when I questioned his decisions or stood up for myself. The first time he said it, my mother gasped, but by the fifth time, she merely looked away, her silence and acceptance I couldn't understand. School became my sanctuary. I threw myself into academics, joining every club that would keep me out of the house until the last possible moment. My straight A's and academic achievements were met with indifference from Harrison. "What good are A's if you don't have common sense?" he'd say, barely glancing at my report card. Meanwhile, Tyler struggled academically, bringing home C's and D's that Harrison blamed on bad teachers or the school system failing to engage active boys properly. When Tyler was caught cheating on a math test, Harrison stormed into the school, not to apologize or accept responsibility, but to argue that the teacher was at fault for making the material unnecessarily complicated. My only real friend during this time was Allison Patel, a quiet girl from my advanced English class who shared my love of books. We spent lunch periods discussing novels and poetry, creating a small bubble of normalcy in my increasingly chaotic life. Allison was the first to notice the bruises, the way I winced when someone touched my shoulder or back unexpectedly. "Are things okay at home?" she asked one day as we walked to chemistry class. "Of course," I answered too quickly. "Just clumsy, that's all." But Allison's parents, Marcus and Janet, weren't as easily fooled. When I visited their home, they noticed how I flinched at loud noises, how I asked permission before taking food or using the bathroom. Janet, a pediatric nurse, would look at me with concerned eyes that made me both comforted and terrified. They represented what a family should be: loving, supportive, respectful, making the reality of my home life even more painful by comparison. "You can talk to us about anything," Marcus told me once, his kind eyes holding mine. "Anything at all." But I couldn't. The shame was too great, the fear too deep. What if no one believed me? What if they took me away from my mother? What if things got worse? A few teachers tried to reach out as well. Mrs. Lawrence, my English teacher, kept me after class one day when I submitted an essay about invisible prisons. "This is powerfully written, Brooke," she said, "but I'm concerned about the content. Is there something you want to talk about?" I shook my head, forcing a smile. "It's just creative writing, Mrs. Lawrence." I was inspired by the yellow wallpaper. She didn't look convinced, but didn't push further. I was both relieved and disappointed. Part of me desperately wanted someone to see through my lies, to rescue me from what was happening, but the larger part was terrified of the consequences of speaking the truth. My 16th birthday passed without celebration. Mom whispered happy birthday when Harrison wasn't around and slipped me a card with $20 hidden inside, money that Harrison found and confiscated the next day, claiming I needed to learn the value of earning. A week later, Tyler's birthday was marked with a lavish party, expensive gifts, and a cake that cost more than our weekly grocery budget. I was expected to help serve his friends, clean up after them, and stay out of the way unless needed. That night, as I listened to Tyler and his friends laughing downstairs while I scrubbed chocolate frosting from the kitchen counters, something hardened inside me. The injustice of it all crystallized into a cold, clear understanding. I was not valued in this house. I was not loved. I was tolerated at best, resented at worst. The emotional abuse was constant, the belittling comments, the comparisons to Tyler, the isolation from friends and activities. Harrison controlled every aspect of my life, from the clothes I wore to the people I spoke with. My cell phone use was monitored, my internet access restricted. I was becoming a ghost in my own life, fading a little more each day under the weight of Harrison's thumb. But it was the physical abuse that left the visible scars. The grabbing turned to shoving, the shoving to slapping. Each incident was followed by guilt-inducing explanations. "Look what you made me do," or "If you'd just listen, this wouldn't happen." My mother's responses became more pathetic with each incident. "He doesn't mean it," she'd say, or "It's not as bad as it looks." Sometimes she'd cry and promise things would get better, but they never did. Her eyes, once bright with life and love, became dull and avoidant, unable to witness what she couldn't bring herself to stop. The household functioned on fear. My fear of Harrison's temper, Mom's fear of losing financial security, even Tyler's fear of disappointing his father, though he channeled it into aggression toward me. We moved around each other like actors in a terrible play, saying lines we didn't write, playing roles we didn't choose. But the worst was yet to come, and when it did, it would change everything. The day that finally broke me started like any other Tuesday. I woke at 6, made breakfast for the family, and caught the bus to school with a gnawing hunger in my stomach. Harrison had complained that the eggs were overdone, dumping my portion into the trash as punishment. School offered its usual respite. I aced a calculus test, discussed Jane Austen in English class, and spent lunch with Allison planning our research project on women's suffrage. For a few hours, I was just a normal teenager with normal concerns, grades, friendships, the future. The normalcy shattered the moment I opened our front door at 3:45 p.m. The sound of male laughter and the smell of pizza hit me simultaneously. Tyler had friends over. 5 boys from his baseball team sprawled across our living room, surrounded by open pizza boxes, soda cans, and bags of chips. The coffee table was sticky with spilled drinks, and muddy cleats had left tracks across the carpet I'd vacuumed just that morning. Tyler looked up as I entered, a smirk spreading across his face. At 18, he had grown to mirror his father in both appearance and demeanor, broad-shouldered and handsome in the conventional sense, but with cold eyes that calculated rather than connected. "Finally," he said loudly. "Guys, this is the stepsister I was telling you about." I tried to slip past them toward the stairs, but Tyler called out, "Hey, we need drinks and those hot wings Dad ordered. They're in the kitchen. Bring them in here." I paused, my backpack heavy with textbooks and assignments due tomorrow. "I have homework," I said. "Get it yourself." One of his friends snickered, but Tyler's face darkened. "Dad says you're supposed to help out when I have friends over." "I didn't know you were having friends over," I replied, fatigue making me bolder than usual. "And I have 3 papers due tomorrow." "Not my problem," Tyler shrugged. "The wings are getting cold." Something in me snapped. After a day of being praised for my intelligence and treated with respect by teachers and peers, reverting to Tyler's servant felt unbearable. "I'm not your maid," I said quietly but firmly. "I'm going to do my homework." As I turned to leave, Tyler grabbed his phone.
Fine.
"I'll tell Dad you're being a bitch again." I continued upstairs, trying to ignore the pit in my stomach. Tyler's complaints to Harrison always resulted in punishment, but I desperately needed to complete my assignments. Maybe Harrison would be home late. Maybe this once he'd listen to my side. 2 hours later, the front door slammed with enough force to rattle the pictures on my bedroom wall. Heavy footsteps pounded up the stairs, and I knew immediately that Tyler had indeed texted his father. I quickly saved my English essay and braced myself. Harrison didn't knock. The door flew open, hitting the wall with a crack that made me jump. His face was mottled red, his tie loosened but still hanging around his neck like a noose. "What's this I hear about you refusing to help your brother?" he demanded, his voice deceptively quiet. I had homework, I explained, gesturing to my laptop. 3 assignments due tomorrow. I just needed. What you need, Harrison cut me off, is to learn respect. Tyler had friends over. Important friends. The coach's son was there. And you embarrassed him. Embarrassed this family. I didn't. Don't interrupt me, he roared, making me shrink back against my desk. You live in my house, eat my food, wear clothes I pay for, and you can't even do the simplest things asked of you. I do everything around here, I said, my voice breaking. I cook, I clean, I get straight A's. Tyler does nothing, and you, the comparison to his son was my mistake. Harrison's face contorted with rage as he unbuckled his belt, sliding it through the loops of his pants, with a hiss of leather that would haunt my nightmares for years to come. Stand up, he ordered. Fear froze me to my chair. Please, I whispered.
I'm sorry.
I'll go help now. It's too late for that.
Stand up.
As I shakily rose, I saw my mother in the doorway behind him, her face pale, one hand covering her mouth. Mom, I pleaded. Please. Her eyes met mine, filled with tears and something worse, resignation. She made a small, helpless gesture with her hands before speaking. Harrison, maybe we could just ground her this time? Stay out of this, Stephanie. Harrison snapped without turning. She needs to learn. The first strike caught me across the back, the pain so sharp and sudden that I couldn't even scream. The second hit my shoulder, the third the back of my thighs. I counted 6 lashes in total, each one punctuated by Harrison's labored breathing and my stifled sobs. When it was over, he coiled the belt around his fist, breathing heavily as if he'd exerted himself. No dinner tonight, he announced. Maybe hunger will improve your attitude. As he turned to leave, he addressed my mother, who still stood frozen in the doorway. Make sure she stays in here. I don't want to see her face again tonight. Mom nodded mutely, her eyes downcast. As Harrison brushed past her, she seemed to physically shrink, making herself smaller to avoid contact with him. When we were alone, she finally entered my room, closing the door softly behind her. I lay face down on my bed, each breath sending fresh waves of pain through my body. Let me see, she whispered, gently lifting the back of my shirt. Her sharp intake of breath told me what I couldn't see, that the welts were bad, possibly bleeding. I'll get some ice, she said, her voice trembling. Why didn't you stop him? I asked, the question I'd been holding back for years finally escaping. Mom's hand stilled. You don't understand, Brooke. Harrison, he provides for us. We need him. No, we don't, I said, wincing as I sat up to face her. Dad left us the house. You have a job. We were fine before him. It's complicated, she murmured, unable to meet my eyes. Sometimes in life, we have to make compromises. Compromises? I echoed in disbelief. He just beat me with a belt. Lower your voice, she hissed, glancing nervously at the door. You'll make things worse. In that moment, looking at my mother's frightened eyes, I realized a devastating truth. She would never protect me from Harrison. Whether from fear, financial dependence, or some misguided belief that this was what we deserved, she had chosen her path, and it didn't include standing up for me. After she left to get ice, I heard them arguing downstairs. Their voices rose and fell, Mom's pleading tone occasionally breaking through Harrison's deeper rumble. I strained to hear, hope flickering that perhaps she was finally defending me. She's just a teenager, I heard Mom say. The belt was too much, Harrison. Don't tell me how to discipline her, he shot back. Your coddling is why she's so disrespectful. If my father had caught me talking back like that, she's not your child. Mom's voice was louder now, braver than I'd heard in years. There was a pause, then Harrison's voice, deadly quiet. No, she's not. And that's becoming increasingly clear. Another pause, then Mom's voice again, deflated and defeated. I'm sorry. I didn't mean, of course you're her father now. Go take her the ice if you must, Harrison said dismissively. But remember, who pays the bills in this house, Stephanie? Remember what your life was like before me. When Mom returned with the ice pack, her eyes were red-rimmed, her hands shaky. She helped me apply it to the worst welts, her touch gentle but impersonal, as if she were a nurse treating a stranger. It'll be better tomorrow, she said, the same thing she always said.
Just try to get some sleep.
After she left, I lay in the darkness, the pain in my body nothing compared to the agony in my heart. The truth I'd been avoiding crashed down with undeniable clarity. No one was coming to save me. Not my mother, not a teacher, not some authority figure who would magically recognize my suffering. If I wanted to survive, I would have to save myself. That night, as the house grew quiet and the welts on my back throbbed in time with my heartbeat, I made a decision that would change the course of my life. I would leave this house, this prison of fear and pain. I would find a way out, no matter what it took. I didn't know yet how I would do it or where I would go. I had no money, no resources, no support system. But as I stared at the ceiling, one thought crystallized with perfect clarity. Staying would destroy me. And I refused to be destroyed. For the next 2 weeks, I lived a double life. On the surface, I was the obedient stepdaughter, quiet, compliant, invisible. I served Tyler and his friends without complaint, cleaned the house to Harrison's exacting standards, and kept my eyes downcast during his lectures on my many failings. The welts on my back faded from angry red to dull purple, then sickly yellow, a calendar of healing marking the days since my decision. But beneath this performance of submission, I was planning my escape with the methodical precision of someone much older than 16. During free periods at school, I used the library computers to research youth shelters and resources for runaways, always careful to clear the browser history afterward. I printed information at the school library, a page at a time, hiding them between homework assignments in my binder. What I found wasn't encouraging. Most shelters had limited beds, strict curfews, and maximum stays of 2 to 4 weeks. Foster care seemed equally daunting. Stories of multiple placements and abuse made me hesitant to enter the system so close to my 18th birthday. I'd be an adult in less than 2 years. I just needed to bridge the gap. Money was my biggest obstacle. Harrison controlled my mother's income, and my own earnings from occasional babysitting jobs went straight into a college fund I suspected didn't actually exist. I started saving my lunch money, skipping meals to tuck away a few dollars each day. Over 2 weeks, I managed to save $27. Not much, but a start. Then disaster struck. Harrison was organizing my room, his euphemism for searching it, and found the cash hidden in a tampon box, the one place I thought he wouldn't look. Planning something? He asked, dangling the bills before me that evening, his voice casual, but his eyes sharp. Saving for a book. I lied, my heart pounding. For school. All school books should be provided, he said. If you need something extra, I'll order it. No need for secret cash. He pocketed the money, adding, I'll put this in your college fund. That night, a new lock appeared on the outside of my bedroom door. Just a precaution, Harrison explained to my mother. She's been acting erratic lately. Teenagers sleepwalk, sometimes. It's for her safety. The lock was only used when they were sleeping or out of the house, but its message was clear. I was now a prisoner in my own home. Harrison also increased his monitoring in other ways, checking my backpack daily, requiring receipts for any school expenses, even limiting my bathroom time to prevent dawdling. I needed a new plan, and fast. At school, I finally confided in Allison, carefully sharing some of my situation while downplaying the worst aspects. Even this edited version made her eyes widen with concern. You can stay with us, she offered immediately. My parents would understand. I considered it briefly, but the Patels lived just 3 streets away from us. It would be the first place Harrison would look, and I couldn't risk bringing his wrath down on the only people who had shown me kindness. Thanks, but I need to get farther away, I admitted. Somewhere he can't find me easily. Allison bit her lip, then reached into her backpack and pressed $40 into my hand. My birthday money, she explained.
Take it.
Please. That money became my new secret, one I guarded more carefully, hiding it in the lining of my winter coat that hung forgotten in the back of my closet during the warm spring months. Through more research, I discovered a youth program in Cincinnati, about 2 hours away by bus, that offered transitional housing and education support for teens in crisis. They had a 6-month residential program that included counseling, high school completion assistance, and job placement. It seemed perfect, far enough away to be safe, structured enough to provide stability. I needed to gather essential documents: birth certificate, social security card, school records. These would likely be in Harrison's home office, a room I was forbidden to enter without supervision. I would have to time it perfectly, perhaps during one of his golf outings with clients. The opportunity came on a Saturday when Harrison took Tyler to a baseball tournament in Columbus. They would be gone overnight, leaving just Mom and me at home. Mom had plans to meet her sister for lunch, giving me a 2-hour window to search the office. I waited until her car disappeared down the street, then headed straight for Harrison's sanctuary. The heavy oak door opened silently. I had oiled the hinges the day before under the pretense of cleaning. Inside, the room smelled of leather and Harrison's cologne, the scents making my stomach clench with Pavlovian fear. The filing cabinet yielded nothing but financial records and insurance policies. His desk drawers contained office supplies, business cards, and a flask of whiskey. I was beginning to panic when I spotted a fireproof safe tucked under the credenza. It would certainly contain the documents I needed, and would certainly be locked. I tried obvious combinations: Harrison's birthday, Tyler's birthday, their old house number, with no success. As precious minutes ticked by, desperation set in. I was about to give up when I noticed a framed photo on the bookshelf, the only personal touch in the sterile office. It showed a younger Harrison standing beside a classic Corvette, its license plate clearly visible, CV 1968. With trembling fingers, I tried 1-9-6-8. The safe clicked open. Inside, I found exactly what I was looking for: a blue folder containing family documents. My birth certificate was there, as was my social security card. I also found my original health insurance card and several report cards Harrison had intercepted before I could show them to Mom. I took only what belonged to me, carefully replacing everything else exactly as I had found it. As I was closing the safe, I noticed a manila envelope labeled Garrett Wilson Estate. My father's name made me pause. Inside were documents related to the sale of our old house, and my heart stopped. A copy of my father's will specifying that a trust had been established for my education. According to the statement inside, that trust contained over $50,000. Money that Harrison now controlled as my legal guardian. Money I would never see unless I escaped. I returned everything to the safe except my own documents, which I slipped into the back of my calculus textbook, the one place Harrison would never look. When Mom returned home, I was exactly where I was supposed to be, at the kitchen table working on homework. If she noticed my shaking hands or flushed face, she didn't mention it. That night, I took stock of my resources. $40 from Allison, my student ID, the essential documents, and a single dollar bill I found in an old birthday card. $41 to start a new life. It wasn't much, but it was everything I had. The next week brought increased tension at home. Harrison seemed suspicious, watching me more closely than usual. Twice, I caught him in my room when I returned from school, though he claimed he was fixing a loose floorboard or checking for mold. My backpack was searched more thoroughly, my phone checked for unauthorized calls. "Your attitude concerns me," he said at dinner one night, pointing his fork at me like a weapon. You've been too quiet lately. What are you hiding? Nothing, I answered, eyes on my plate. Just focused on school. Look at me when I'm talking to you, he snapped. I raised my eyes, careful to keep my expression neutral despite the hatred burning in my chest. That's better, he said with a cold smile. Remember, Brooke, I'm watching you. Always. That night, as I lay awake listening to the house settle, I heard my mother's soft footsteps approach my door. She slipped something underneath, a small envelope containing $20 and a note. For the book you wanted. Love, Mom. It was both a peace offering and an acknowledgement of Harrison's theft. Too little, too late, but it brought my escape fund to $61. Enough for a bus ticket to Cincinnati and maybe a meal or two. The next day, Harrison threatened worse punishment after I forgot to defrost the chicken for dinner. As he loomed over me, I caught the familiar scent of whiskey on his breath and saw his hand drift toward his belt buckle. Just do what he says, my mother whispered from across the kitchen. It's easier. In that moment, I knew I couldn't wait any longer. The next opportunity would be my last in this house, regardless of whether my plans were complete. Better to leave with $61 and incomplete plans than to stay for one more strike of Harrison's belt. That night, I packed a small backpack with essentials, 2 changes of clothes, my documents, toiletries, a notebook, and a photo of my dad. I wore my heaviest jeans and layered 2 shirts under my jacket, both to maximize what I could take and to provide some cushioning should Harrison catch me before I made it out. I set my alarm for 4:30 a.m., early enough that both Harrison and Tyler would be deeply asleep, but late enough that I could catch the first bus downtown at 5:15. As I finally drifted asleep, my last thought was of my mother. I was leaving her behind in this house of horrors, but I had to believe she was making her own choice to stay. At 16, my first responsibility had to be to myself, a lesson I'd learned from her failure to protect me. Tomorrow, I would be free, or I would face consequences worse than any I'd experienced before. There was no middle ground left. The shrill beep of my watch alarm at 4:30 a.m. sent a jolt of adrenaline through my body. I silenced it instantly, heart pounding as I listened for any movement in the house. Nothing but the familiar creaks of the heating system and the distant hum of the refrigerator broke the pre-dawn silence. I was already dressed, having slept in my clothes. The backpack I'd packed sat ready beside my bed, containing everything I could safely take with me, which wasn't much. My hands trembled as I zipped up my jacket and shouldered the bag, its weight both a burden and a reminder of how little I truly possessed. $61 in my pocket. A handful of documents proving my existence. 1 photograph of happier times. A single dollar bill that had somehow survived Harrison's scrutiny, the dollar that would become symbolic of my new beginning. The irony wasn't lost on me. After years of living in a mansion filled with expensive things, I was leaving with less than most homeless people carried. Yet I felt lighter than I had in years, the anticipation of freedom outweighing the fear of the unknown. The bedroom door opened with a soft click. Harrison hadn't bothered locking it last night, confident in his psychological control over me. I paused in the doorway, looking back at the room that had been my prison cell for years. The narrow bed with its faded blue comforter. The desk where I'd studied for countless tests while nursing bruises. The window through which I'd watched seasons change, dreaming of escape. I felt nothing saying goodbye to it. No nostalgia, no regret. Just a cold certainty that I was doing what I needed to survive. The hallway stretched before me like a minefield. I knew every creaky floorboard, every spot to avoid. With the precision of someone who has rehearsed an escape route hundreds of times in their mind, I navigated the corridor, past Tyler's room where his heavy snoring provided audio cover, past the master bedroom where Harrison and my mother slept. I paused at their door, a sudden impulse to see my mother one last time nearly overwhelming me. Would she understand when she found me gone? Would she worry? Would she finally stand up to Harrison, or would she accept whatever story he fabricated about my disappearance? In the end, I kept moving. There would be no tearful goodbyes, no promises to stay in touch. Clean breaks heal faster, and I needed to heal. The stairs were trickier, each step carefully taken on the outer edge where the wood was less likely to protest under my weight. At the bottom, I slipped my feet into the sneakers I'd positioned by the door the night before, ready for a quick exit. The deadbolt turned with a sound that seemed thunderous in the quiet house. I froze, waiting for shouts or footsteps, but none came. With one final push, I was outside, the cool spring air hitting my face like a baptism. Freedom. I didn't run. Running would attract attention in the sleepy suburban neighborhood. Instead, I walked with purpose toward the main road, fighting the urge to look back at the house that had never been a home. Only when I turned the corner, out of sight of Harrison's windows, did I allow myself to quicken my pace. The bus stop was a mile away, near the shopping center at the edge of our neighborhood. The streets were empty at this hour, the occasional car passing with drivers who barely glanced at the teenage girl walking alone. In Oakwood Heights, appearances were everything, and nobody wanted to acknowledge anything that might disrupt the perfect suburban facade. I reached the bus stop at 5:05 a.m., 10 minutes before the first downtown bus was scheduled to arrive. My single dollar, the last of my emergency money, would pay for this first leg of my journey. From downtown, I would use some of Allison's money to buy a ticket to Cincinnati, where the youth program awaited. The bus arrived precisely on time, its headlights cutting through the morning mist. The doors hissed open to reveal a middle-aged driver with kind eyes and a salt and pepper beard. "Early start, huh?" he commented as I dropped my dollar into the fare box. "New job." I lied, the words sticking in my dry throat. He nodded, accepting this without question, and I made my way to a seat near the middle of the nearly empty bus. As we pulled away from the curb, a wave of dizzying relief washed over me. I had done it. I had actually escaped. But the relief was quickly tempered by the reality of what lay ahead. I was 16, alone, with barely enough money for a week's worth of food. I had no phone, no way to contact anyone, and nowhere to go if the Cincinnati program didn't accept me. I was betting everything on a resource I'd only read about online. The bus lurched through the awakening city, passing from the manicured suburbs into areas with more diverse housing, then into the commercial district with its office buildings and restaurants. With each mile, Harrison's reach seemed to diminish, his shadow over me growing fainter. The driver, Carlos, according to his name badge, kept glancing at me in his rearview mirror. When we reached downtown, he called out before I could exit. "Hey, kid, you sure you're okay? Need me to call someone for you?" His concern caught me off guard. How did he know? Did I look that desperate, that obviously like a runaway? "I'm fine," I said, forcing a smile. "Thanks." Carlos didn't look convinced. "Listen, if you need help, well, my sister runs a women's shelter over on Maple. Just tell her Carlos sent you." I nodded, throat tight with unexpected emotion at this small kindness from a stranger. "Thank you," I managed before stepping off the bus. Downtown was just waking up, coffee shops opening their doors, early commuters hurrying toward office buildings. I found the Greyhound station easily, its dingy interior a stark contrast to the gleaming skyscrapers surrounding it. A one-way ticket to Cincinnati cost $35, leaving me with $25 for food and emergencies. The bus wouldn't leave until 7:30 a.m., giving me almost 2 hours to wait. 2 hours during which Harrison might discover my absence and start searching. I spent those hours in constant vigilance, jumping at every police officer or security guard who entered the station, expecting Harrison to appear at any moment. I bought a cheap baseball cap from a souvenir shop in the terminal and tucked my hair under it, a pathetic disguise but one that gave me some sense of security. The bus to Cincinnati was half full, mostly with people who kept to themselves. I took a window seat near the back, watching the Ohio landscape roll by with a mixture of fear and hope. By noon, we were pulling into Cincinnati's Greyhound station, and I was officially farther from home than I'd ever been alone. Finding the youth center proved more challenging than expected. The address I'd memorized led me to a nondescript building in a neighborhood of mixed commercial and residential properties. A simple sign read New Beginnings Youth Services, with no indication of whether they offered the housing program I'd read about. With no other options, I pushed through the front door into a small reception area where a woman in her 40s looked up from a computer. "Can I help you?" she asked, her expression neutral but not unwelcoming. I need a place to stay," I said, the reality of my situation suddenly hitting me full force. "I read about your 6-month program online." Her gaze sharpened, taking in my backpack, my anxious expression, the fading bruise visible on my wrist where my sleeve had ridden up. "How old are you, sweetheart?" 16. "Any ID?" I nodded, pulling out my school ID and birth certificate with trembling hands. "Brooke Wilson," she read. "From Oakwood Heights? That's quite a ways from here." "I can't go back there," I said simply. She nodded, not pressing for details yet.
I'm Melissa Taylor.
"I'm a social worker here. Why don't you come to my office, and we can talk about your options?" Melissa's office was small but comfortable, with motivational posters on the walls and a desk cluttered with files and family photos. She offered me water and a granola bar, which I accepted gratefully, suddenly aware that I hadn't eaten since dinner the previous night. "The residential program does exist," she explained after I'd had a chance to eat, "but there's an intake process. We need parental consent for minors unless there are documented cases of abuse or neglect." My heart sank. He'll never give consent. And if you contact him, he'll just come get me, and I stopped, unable to voice my fears. "Who will come get you, Brooke?" Melissa asked gently. The dam broke. Years of pent-up fear, pain, and rage poured out as I told her everything. The gradual escalation of Harrison's control, the physical abuse, my mother's failure to protect me, the belt incident that had finally pushed me to run. I showed her the fading welts on my back, still visible 2 weeks later. Melissa listened without interruption, taking notes and occasionally asking clarifying questions. When I finished, she leaned forward, her expression grave but kind. "What you've described is serious child abuse, Brooke. By law, I have to report this to Children's Services. They'll open an investigation." "Will they send me back?" I asked, terror rising in my throat.
Not immediately, no.
"Given the physical evidence and the nature of your allegations, we can place you in emergency housing while the investigation proceeds." She paused. "But I want to be honest with you. These cases can be complicated. Without witnesses or prior reports, it might become your word against his." The reality of my situation crashed down on me. I had escaped physically, but legally, I was still bound to Harrison and my mother. I was a minor, a dependent, with limited rights and resources. "What happens now?" I asked, my voice small. "First, we find you a safe place to sleep tonight. Then tomorrow, we'll file the official reports and begin the process of determining your long-term placement." Melissa's voice was professional but compassionate. "It won't be easy, Brooke. But you're not alone anymore." That night, I slept in a youth shelter connected to New Beginnings, a dormitory-style room with 3 other girls, all with their own stories of family breakdown, abuse, or neglect. The bed was narrow and the pillow thin, but it was the most peaceful sleep I'd had in years, free from the fear of Harrison appearing in my doorway. The next morning brought the beginning of bureaucratic machinery that would dominate my life for months. Melissa helped me file a detailed report with Children's Services, documenting the abuse I'd suffered. A police report followed, complete with photographs of my healing injuries. A medical examination confirmed older scarring consistent with my account of long-term physical abuse. Then came the wait. Children's Services contacted Harrison and my mother, who reacted exactly as I'd feared. They denied everything, claiming I was a troubled teen who had run away after being disciplined for increasingly rebellious behavior. Harrison leveraged his standing in the community, successful businessman, generous donor to local charities, coach of youth golf programs, to paint himself as a concerned stepfather dealing with an ungrateful, difficult child. Tyler provided a statement supporting his father's version of events, claiming he'd never witnessed any abuse and that I was always making up stories for attention. Several of Harrison's friends and business associates vouched for his character, describing him as strict but fair. My mother's response hurt the worst. In her statement, she acknowledged that Harrison had occasionally used corporal punishment, but insisted it was never abusive. She described me as emotionally unstable since my father's death, prone to exaggeration and manipulation. She begged me to stop these lies and come home. Without prior documentation, no hospital visits, no police reports, no school counselor records, the investigation stalled in a frustrating he-said-she-said impasse. The welts on my back had faded by then, leaving only my word and the social worker's documentation of injuries that could, as Harrison's lawyer suggested, have been sustained during her unauthorized departure from home. 6 weeks after my escape, the case was deemed inconclusive due to insufficient evidence. Harrison and my mother were required to attend parenting classes, and any return to their home would include regular check-ins from a caseworker, but no criminal charges were filed. I sat in Melissa's office as she delivered this news, a numbness spreading through me that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. What happens to me now? I asked, the question becoming my mantra. You have options, Melissa assured me. You can return home with monitoring in place, or you can request alternative placement, foster care, possibly, or continued residence in a group home until you're 18. I'm not going back, I said immediately. The thought of living under Harrison's roof again, even with occasional visits from a caseworker who could be charmed like everyone else, made me physically ill. I thought you might say that. Melissa smiled sadly. The good news is, we've secured you a spot in our transitional living program. It's not the original 6-month program, but a longer-term option for teens who can't return home but don't thrive in traditional foster care. She explained the program. A supervised apartment-style residence where I would live with 3 other girls around my age, attending school while learning independent living skills. We would have curfews and rules, but also gradually increasing freedom and responsibility. The program would provide counseling, education support, and eventually job placement assistance. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't the family I deserved or the justice Harrison deserved. But it was safety, stability, and a path forward that didn't lead back into the arms of my abuser. That night, as I packed the few belongings I'd accumulated during my stay at the shelter into a donated duffel bag, I found the single dollar bill still tucked into the lining of my jacket. I smoothed it carefully and placed it in the small journal Melissa had given me to record my thoughts. On the first page, I wrote, I left with $1, but I gained my freedom. That makes me richer than he'll ever be. The transitional living program housed me in a converted Victorian home in a quiet Cincinnati neighborhood. Each floor contained 2 apartment units, each shared by 2 girls with a resident advisor living in a separate unit on the first floor. My roommate was Jasmine, a 17-year-old who had aged out of foster care after multiple placements. Home sweet home, she said when we met, gesturing around our modest space with its twin beds, shared desk, and mini fridge. At least nobody's hitting us here. Jasmine's matter-of-fact attitude about abuse was jarring at first, but soon became comforting. Here was someone who understood without needing explanations, who didn't flinch at the truth or offer empty platitudes about forgiveness and healing. Our days followed a structured routine. Weekday mornings were for school. I enrolled in the local high school to complete my junior year, while Jasmine worked on her GED. Afternoons included mandatory study hours, life skills classes, and therapy sessions. Evenings were for chores, dinner preparation, we cooked in rotation, and limited free time before curfew. The program's rules felt restrictive after my first taste of freedom, but I understood their purpose. This wasn't a prison. It was a bridge between dependence and independence, teaching us the skills Harrison had actively prevented me from learning. My first job came 3 weeks after moving in. Frank Wilson, the owner of a local diner called the Early Bird, hired me as a weekend server despite my age. I claimed to be 18, and he pretended to believe me. The pay was minimal, but the tips were decent, and Frank proved to be more than just an employer. "You remind me of my daughter," he told me one day as I helped him prep for the morning rush. "Same determined look in your eyes." "Where is she now?" I asked. "Law school at Ohio State. Worked her way through undergrad right here at this counter." He smiled proudly. "Nobody gave her anything. She earned every bit of it." Frank became an unexpected mentor, teaching me not just about customer service and food preparation, but about financial management, workplace etiquette, and self-advocacy. When I confessed my real age months later, he just nodded. "Figured as much. Your work permit looked a bit too perfect." He winked. "Your secret's safe with me. Just keep those grades up." I did keep my grades up, excelling academically despite switching schools mid-year. My new school counselor, noticing my test scores and transcript, encouraged me to consider college, something Harrison had always dismissed as unnecessary for me, though he'd already selected prestigious universities for Tyler. Meanwhile, the legal aftermath of my departure continued to unfold. Harrison and my mother were required to participate in family counseling sessions, which I was technically supposed to join. I refused, exercising my right to decline reunification efforts. Harrison's initial demands that I return home gradually subsided as he realized the scrutiny would continue as long as he pursued the matter. For months after I left, my mother reached out through Melissa, asking to meet. Against my better judgment, I agreed to a supervised visit at the youth center. She looked smaller somehow, thinner, with new lines around her eyes and mouth. She cried when she saw me, reaching for a hug I couldn't bring myself to give. "Please come home," she said immediately. "Harrison has changed. He's in therapy, he's taking anger management classes. He misses you." "Does he admit what he did to me?" I asked. Her hesitation was answer enough. "He acknowledges he was too harsh sometimes. But Brooke, every family has problems. We can work through this."
No, Mom.
What happened wasn't family problems. It was abuse. "I'm not coming back." "Where will you go? What will you do?" she demanded, frustration edging into her voice. "You're 16. You need your family." "I needed my mother," I replied quietly. "I needed her for years. Where was she?" She had no answer for that. Before leaving, she pressed an envelope into my hand containing $300. "He doesn't know," she whispered. "Please take it." I donated the money to the youth center's emergency fund. I couldn't explain, even to myself, why I couldn't keep it, only that it felt tainted, too little too late, a price tag on years of suffering. After that meeting, I made the difficult decision to cease all contact with my mother. The therapist I saw weekly, Dr. Bennett, helped me work through the guilt and grief this decision caused. "Setting boundaries isn't punishment," she explained. "It's self-preservation. You can revisit this choice when you're stronger, when contact with your mother doesn't threaten your recovery." Recovery. Such a clinical word for the messy, non-linear process of rebuilding a self that had been systematically dismantled. Some days brought progress, a good grade, a customer compliment, a moment of genuine laughter with Jasmine. Other days brought flashbacks, panic attacks, nightmares that left me gasping and sweat-soaked. Through it all, I kept working, saving, and studying. Frank increased my hours during summer break, allowing me to build a modest savings account. I opened it without an adult cosigner thanks to a special program at a local credit union partnering with the youth center. My junior year of high school ended with straight A's and recognition from the principal for overcoming significant personal challenges. My senior year began with a new focus: college applications and scholarship essays. Every spare moment not spent working or studying was dedicated to researching financial aid options and writing personal statements that somehow had to translate my experiences into something admissions committees could evaluate. The local community college offered an information session at our school, and I found myself drawn to their practical approach and affordability. The admissions counselor, Dr. Rivera, took a special interest in my situation. "You're exactly the kind of student we're looking for," she told me after reviewing my transcripts. "Determined, resilient, academically strong. Let's talk about scholarships." With Dr. Rivera's guidance, I applied for every grant and scholarship available: state programs for independent students, private foundations supporting youth who had experienced trauma, academic merit awards. The process was exhausting, requiring documentation of my independence, letters from social workers and teachers, and endless essays about overcoming adversity. By spring, I had secured enough financial aid to cover tuition and books at Cincinnati Community College for an associate's degree in business administration. I would still need to work, but the path forward was clear and achievable. As my 18th birthday approached, bringing with it legal adulthood and the end of my eligibility for the transitional living program, I faced new challenges. Where would I live? How would I balance full-time work, full-time school, and basic survival? The youth center offered a stepping stone. Graduates of the transitional program could apply for subsidized apartments with gradually increasing rent over 2 years. I qualified based on my work history and educational plans, securing a tiny studio apartment that would be my first truly independent home. Moving day arrived exactly 1 year after my escape from Harrison's house. My possessions still fit in 2 duffel bags, but now included textbooks, work uniforms, and small comforts purchased with my own money: a soft blanket, a reading lamp, a set of dishes from the thrift store. Melissa helped me move, her car barely accommodating my meager belongings. As we carried the last bag up 3 flights of stairs to my apartment, she paused at the doorway. "You know, most kids who come through our program need years to get where you are now," she said. "I've never seen anyone so determined." "I had good help," I replied, thinking of Frank, Dr. Rivera, Dr. Bennett, and Melissa herself, the adults who had shown me what healthy support actually looked like. "You did the work, Brooke. Own that." College began, and with it, a new rhythm to my days. Morning classes, afternoon shifts at the Early Bird, evening study sessions at the library to save on electricity in my apartment. Weekends brought longer work shifts and laundry at the building's coin-operated machines. It was exhausting but purposeful. Each day moved me further from Harrison's control and closer to the future I was building for myself. During my second semester, I found a job posting on the college bulletin board for a marketing assistant at a local firm. The position offered better pay than the diner and potential relevance to my business studies. With Frank's reluctant blessing and a resume that emphasized my organizational skills and work ethic rather than my limited experience, I applied. To my surprise, I was called for an interview. The marketing director, Diane Campbell, was a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who asked challenging questions about my ability to handle the position while attending school. "Why should I hire you over the 30 other applicants, many with more experience?" she asked bluntly. "Because I understand the value of opportunity," I answered with equal directness. "I won't waste yours or mine." Something in my response resonated with her. I was hired on a 3-month probationary period, which turned into a part-time regular position when I consistently exceeded expectations. Diane became another unexpected mentor, taking time to explain marketing concepts, involving me in client meetings, and providing feedback that was direct but constructive, a refreshing change from Harrison's arbitrary criticism. "You have a natural talent for this work," she told me after I helped develop a successful social media campaign for a local business. Have you considered focusing your degree on marketing specifically? With her encouragement, I adjusted my educational path, taking additional courses in marketing, digital media, and business communication. My associate's degree program stretched to 5 semesters instead of 4, but the specialized knowledge proved invaluable in my work with Diane's firm. As I approached graduation from community college, Diane suggested I consider continuing to a bachelor's degree. The state university has an excellent business program, and you could transfer your credits. The firm would work around your class schedule. We don't want to lose you. The idea seemed impossible at first. A 4-year university would cost significantly more than community college, even with transferred credits. But Diane introduced me to the university's corporate partnership program, which offered tuition assistance for employees of participating businesses. Between this program, additional scholarships, and my savings from 2 years of careful budgeting, a bachelor's degree came within reach. Throughout this period, therapy remained a constant in my life. Dr. Bennett helped me navigate the complex emotions that success paradoxically triggered: guilt over leaving my mother, anger that still flared unexpectedly, fear that everything I built could somehow be taken away. We worked through the hypervigilance that made me startle at loud noises, the trust issues that kept me from forming close friendships, the perfectionism born from years of impossible standards. Healing isn't linear, she reminded me often. And it isn't about forgetting or even necessarily forgiving. It's about integration, acknowledging what happened while not letting it define your future. Slowly, I began to build a social circle beyond work and school. Jasmine and I maintained our friendship, meeting monthly for coffee to check in on each other's progress. I joined a study group for marketing students, where I met Claire and Marcus, who became my first real friends since Allison. They knew nothing of my past at first, seeing only the capable, ambitious student I presented to the world. When I finally shared parts of my story with them after nearly a year of friendship, their response was supportive without being pitying, exactly what I needed. That explains why you never talk about going home for holidays, Claire said, squeezing my hand. This year, you're coming to my family's Thanksgiving. No arguments. That Thanksgiving with Claire's large, boisterous family was my first experience of what healthy family dynamics could look like. Her parents argued occasionally, but resolved conflicts with respect. Her siblings teased each other, but stepped up when help was needed. No one walked on eggshells. No one controlled the conversation. No one used love as a weapon. I left with a new understanding of what I had missed and what I could potentially create in my own future. By 22, I had completed my bachelor's in business with a specialization in digital marketing. The entry-level position at Diane's firm evolved into an account manager role with my own small client portfolio. My tiny subsidized apartment gave way to a 1-bedroom rental shared with a cat adopted from the local shelter, my first pet, something Harrison had never allowed. My savings, once measured in spare dollars, grew steadily. I opened an IRA after reading financial independence blogs, fascinated by the concept of building wealth from nothing. Each deposit, no matter how small, felt like a victory over Harrison's financial control. I purchased my first car, a used Honda with high mileage but reliable mechanics, from a dealership, negotiating the price down using skills learned in business classes. The day I drove it off the lot was surreal, a tangible symbol of my independence that would have been unimaginable 5 years earlier. Throughout these years, I had no contact with Harrison or Tyler. My mother occasionally sent cards to my old address at the youth center, which Melissa forwarded when they arrived. I read them but rarely responded, maintaining the boundaries that protected my hard-won stability. The cards followed a pattern: updates on family news, subtle guilt trips about my absence, veiled references to Harrison's improvements, and always, the underlying message: come back, forgive, forget, be the daughter I raised you to be. What she never understood was that I was being exactly the daughter she had raised me to be before Harrison. Resourceful, determined, unwilling to accept abuse as the price of belonging. The very strengths that allowed me to escape and build a new life were those my father had nurtured and my mother had once encouraged. In therapy, I worked through the complex grief of losing both parents, my father to death, my mother to her own choices.
Dr.
Bennett helped me understand that my mother was both victim and enabler, trapped in her own patterns of dependency and fear, but still responsible for failing to protect her child. You can acknowledge her limitations without excusing her actions, Dr. Bennett explained. And you can love the mother she was while accepting the mother she became. This perspective helped me respond to her occasional messages with brief, neutral updates on my education and work, neither inviting deeper connection nor completely severing the fragile thread between us. It was a compromise between the daughter, who still loved her mother, and the woman who needed to protect herself. As I approached my 23rd birthday, I looked around my small but comfortable apartment, at the degree hanging on the wall, the business cards with my name printed beneath the company logo, the savings account statement showing a balance that represented thousands of hours of work and sacrifice. From the single dollar I'd escaped with, I had built something Harrison could never take away. Not just financial independence, but self-respect, professional skills, and the knowledge that I had survived the worst and emerged stronger. That night, I took out the journal Melissa had given me years ago, opening to the first page where that single dollar still rested between the pages, slightly faded but intact. Beneath my original entry, I wrote, "5 years later, I'm still richer than he'll ever be." At 27, my life bore no resemblance to the frightened 16-year-old who had fled with a single dollar. I had been promoted to senior marketing strategist at the firm, managing our largest client accounts and mentoring new hires. The side consulting business I'd started 3 years earlier, initially just website design for small local businesses, had grown into a boutique digital marketing agency with its own modest client list. My apartment, once sparse and functional, now reflected both my personal style and financial stability. Art on the walls, comfortable furniture, a dedicated home office for my consulting work. I had friends, colleagues, and a network of supportive relationships built on mutual respect rather than fear and obligation. The psychological scars remained, of course. Certain sounds, a belt being removed, a door slamming too loudly, could still trigger momentary panic. I maintained careful control over my living space, my schedule, my finances, control that sometimes veered into rigidity. Trust came slowly, earned through consistent actions rather than promised words. But therapy had given me tools to manage these responses, to recognize them as normal reactions to abnormal experiences rather than weaknesses or flaws. The flashbacks that once paralyzed me now passed more quickly, acknowledged but not empowered. I was presenting at a regional marketing conference in Columbus when the past collided with the present in an unexpected way. During the networking lunch following my presentation on digital strategy for small businesses, a man approached my table. "That was an impressive talk," he said, extending his hand. "Tyler Matthews, Midwest Sales Director at TechSphere." I froze, the bread roll in my hand suddenly leaden. His face had matured, losing the teenage softness I remembered, but the eyes were unmistakable. Harrison's eyes, calculating and slightly cold even when smiling. He didn't recognize me immediately. Why would he? The poised marketing executive in a tailored suit bore little resemblance to the teenager he had tormented. My hair was different, my posture confident rather than hunched, my voice steady rather than tentative. "Brooke Wilson," I replied, shaking his hand briefly. "Thank you for the compliment." I watched the moment recognition dawned, the slight widening of his eyes, the instinctive step backward, the flush creeping up his neck. "Brooke? My stepsister Brooke?" "Former stepsister," I corrected calmly, aware of colleagues within earshot. It's been a long time. Tyler seemed genuinely flustered, an expression I had never seen on the boy who had wielded his father's favor like a weapon. You look different. That tends to happen in 11 years. An awkward silence stretched between us, filled with unspoken history. Finally, Tyler cleared his throat. Would you have time for a coffee? To catch up? Every instinct screamed to refuse, to walk away, to preserve the life I'd built without any connection to the past. But curiosity, and perhaps a desire to measure exactly how far I'd come, led me to agree to a brief meeting after the conference sessions ended. We met in the hotel lobby cafe, neutral territory, with plenty of witnesses. Tyler appeared without the conference bravado, almost nervous as he stirred sweetener into his coffee. So, he began awkwardly. You're doing well. I am, I confirmed, offering nothing more. That's good.
I'm glad.
He paused. I didn't know what happened to you after you left. Dad Harrison told everyone you'd gone to live with relatives. There were no relatives, I said. Just a youth shelter, then transitional housing. Tyler winced. I didn't know. You never ask. The words weren't accusatory, simply factual. He stared into his coffee. Things fell apart after you left. Dad started drinking more. The business had problems. He and Stephanie divorced about 3 years later. This was news, though not particularly surprising. Without me as the household scapegoat, the dysfunction would have needed new targets. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, surprised to find I meant it. Not for Harrison, but for my mother who had lost everything she sacrificed me to keep. Dad remarried again last year. Some woman from his golf club. Tyler's tone was bitter. I don't see him much. He stopped paying for things once I turned 21. Said I needed to stand on my own feet. The irony wasn't lost on me. Tyler, once the golden child, now experiencing a fraction of the coldness Harrison had always shown me. But I took no pleasure in his struggles. We had both been children shaped by a toxic parent, albeit in very different ways. And your mother? He asked. Stephanie? Do you see her? No, I said simply. We're not in contact. Tyler nodded as if this made perfect sense. She tried to call me a few times after the divorce, but I don't know. It was weird. She wasn't really my mom, you know? I did know. She hadn't really been my mom either, not after Harrison entered our lives. Listen, Tyler said suddenly, leaning forward. What happened back then, the way Dad treated you, the way I treated you, it wasn't right.
I know that now.
I should have said something, done something. The acknowledgement, however belated, struck a chord I hadn't expected. Not forgiveness, exactly, but a small release of tension I hadn't realized I still carried. You were a kid too, I said finally. A privileged, entitled kid, but still a child in that house. Would you want to reconnect with them? Tyler asked. I could give you their contact info. Dad's calmed down a lot since the heart attack last year. No, I said without hesitation. I've built my life without them. I intend to keep it that way. Tyler nodded, accepting this boundary without argument, perhaps the first time he'd ever respected my wishes. As we prepared to leave, he handed me his business card. If you ever change your mind or just want to talk, well, here's my info. I took the card to be polite, knowing I would never use it. This brief intersection of past and present was closure enough. Seeing Tyler struggling in the real world without Harrison's constant protection, while I had flourished despite Harrison's constant opposition. But the encounter prompted me to reconsider one closed door. A week after returning from the conference, I contacted Melissa, who still worked at the youth center, asking if she had my mother's current information. 3 days later, I sat in a quiet coffee shop 30 miles from my apartment, waiting for the woman I hadn't seen in nearly 8 years. She arrived precisely on time, her hair now gray at the temples, her face lined but still recognizable. She wore a simple dress and minimal jewelry, no sign of the designer clothes Harrison had insisted upon during their marriage. "Brooke," she breathed, stopping a few feet from the table. "You look beautiful. So grown up." "Hello, Mom," I said, rising to accept the brief, awkward hug she offered. "Thank you for coming." We settled into cautious conversation, surface-level updates about her job at a local library, my career in marketing, neutral topics that carefully avoided the deeper wounds between us. Eventually, she reached across the table, her fingers stopping just short of touching mine. "I'm sorry, Brooke.
For everything.
For not protecting you, for choosing him over you, for being too weak to stand up to him. I was so afraid of being alone again after your father died that I made terrible choices." Her apology was everything I'd once desperately needed to hear. But the words came years too late, after I'd already healed the deepest wounds without her help. "Why didn't you leave him after I left?" I asked. "You must have known I was telling the truth about how he treated me." She looked down at her hands, twisting a plain silver ring that had replaced her wedding band. "I did know. I always knew. But by then, I had nothing left. No money of my own, no career to fall back on, no family support. Harrison controlled everything. It took me 3 more years to build up the courage to file for divorce, and even then, I left with almost nothing. I left with $1, I said quietly. And I made it work." She flinched at the comparison. "You were always stronger than me, like your father that way." We talked for nearly 2 hours, careful and measured, neither of us quite ready to fully bridge the chasm between us. She asked about my life, seemingly genuinely proud of what I'd accomplished. Asked about her new apartment, her work, her slow rebuilding of independence. When we parted, she asked if we could meet again sometime. I agreed to occasional contact, holiday cards, perhaps lunch every few months, but made it clear that I wasn't ready for more. She accepted these boundaries with a sad smile, understanding that it was more than she deserved, but less than she hoped for. "I never stopped loving you," she said at the door. "Even when I failed you completely, I loved you." "I know," I replied, because I did. Love without protection, without action, without courage, it wasn't enough, but it had existed in its imperfect form. That meeting brought a chapter of my life to a close. I had faced my past, spoken my truth, and walked away intact. The scared girl who fled with a single dollar had become a woman who could set boundaries, speak painful truths, and make choices based on self-respect rather than fear. In the years since, I've continued building both my career and my personal life. The consulting business has grown enough to become my primary focus, allowing me to leave the marketing firm on good terms. I purchased a small condo. My name alone on the mortgage, an achievement that still fills me with quiet pride. I maintain limited contact with my mother through occasional lunches and holiday cards, a relationship that will likely never be close, but has found its own respectful distance. I've never seen Harrison again, nor do I wish to. Tyler sent a Christmas card the first year after our encounter, but has not reached out since, a mutual acknowledgement that our connection belonged to the past. The lessons from my journey have shaped every aspect of who I am today. I learned that safety and dignity are non-negotiable rights, not privileges to be earned or withdrawn. I discovered that family is sometimes chosen rather than born, like Frank from the diner, who still calls monthly to check on his favorite former waitress, or Melissa from the youth center, who attended my college graduation with tears of pride. I learned that wealth isn't measured in designer clothes or expensive houses, but in freedom, self-determination, and the ability to sleep peacefully without fear. That single dollar I escaped with represented not poverty but possibility, the first step toward building a life on my own terms. Perhaps most importantly, I learned that trauma doesn't define you unless you allow it to. The abuse I suffered will always be part of my story, but it's the chapter one survived, not the one I'm currently living. Today, I volunteer at the same youth center that once sheltered me, sharing my experience with teens facing similar circumstances. I've established a small scholarship fund for survivors of domestic abuse pursuing higher education. Each recipient gets their award in an envelope containing a single dollar bill alongside the check. A symbol of the journey from survival to success. When teens in the program ask how I made it through, I tell them the truth. One day at a time, one decision at a time, $1 at a time. I tell them that leaving with nothing but your dignity intact is still leaving with everything that matters. If you're watching this and finding yourself in a situation where someone who should love you is hurting you instead, please know that there is life. Rich, full, joyful life. On the other side of that door. The journey won't be easy, but freedom is worth every difficult step. I started with just $1 and the determination to build something better. What could you build with your courage and resilience? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If my story has resonated with you, please subscribe to this channel for more conversations about overcoming adversity and finding strength in unexpected places. Thank you for listening, and remember, sometimes the richest journeys begin with nearly nothing but hope.